A couple of months back, we got together, and normally we do some sort of event, some sort of educational event at each of the valley counties around this time of year. And because of the COVID and everything that our environment around us, we decided to go ahead and get together and do one big online program. So this is the result of that, and we'd like to thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll find the information that is presented today useful and helpful in your operations. We decided to go ahead and keep this program short. We didn't want to go ahead and do an all-morning program or an all-day program. So we know that y'all are busy, and we can only get your attention for a couple hours out of the day, and hopefully you'll find this in a better format than just sitting around all day and looking at PowerPoints and things like that. We were hoping to go ahead and get some CEUs with this, but we could not do that. We're going to have to go ahead and do that at another event. So whenever we have another educational program that offers CEUs, please make sure and sign up for that. Unfortunately, for this program, we could not get any CEUs. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and kick it off. And Marco Ponce, the county agent in Cameron County, could not join us this morning, but he was going to be introducing Chris Bettis. Chris Bettis is the county director for FSA there in Cameron County. So I'll go ahead and do the introduction, Chris. And Chris is going to be talking to us about the CFAP 2 program. And I know that the CFAP 1 was a program that helped out a lot of the farmers and ranchers earlier in the year, and that was back in June. And then they came back, and I know that they approved a second round, and this is the CFAP 2. I know it's got a deadline for application, and it looks a little different than the first one. So hopefully Chris can go ahead and shed a little bit of light on that. So Chris, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Omar. All right. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the time. Appreciate this opportunity and to reach out to our ranchers and livestock producers in the area. Okay. The CFAP 2, a lot of producers are asking, how did this come about? Well, they had additional funding under the CARES Act, and they indicated that livestock and hogs and sheep and chickens and all those continue to have a market decline, so they were going to authorize the funding that was left over, and we're going to utilize this because it's a limited funding program and they need to utilize this. Okay, the application period is going to end on December 11th, so please make sure to mark that on your calendar, that if you're going to pursue this application process with FSA, that you don't come in later than that, because we don't have late file provisions. I know producers ask, it's you can't say you didn't know. That's not considered an applicable excuse. Okay, the form is called an AD-3117, 3117. The basic information, you go to your recording county wherever you operate, wherever they have your records. If you're not in our system, or you know somebody in your area, a neighbor, a family member that is a livestock producer, beef cattle or sheep or hogs and pigs, please let them know. They're going to complete what's called an AD-2047. That takes your basic information, we load it in our system, and now you're in the government system. And we go from there, and then we can start your form. When we start looking at your numbers, okay, this program is going to only pay on livestock during a certain time period, but it cannot include your breeding livestock. So let me explain that. So from the dates of April 16th to August 31st, you're going to look at your highest inventory of your calves, heifers, and steers during that time period. Even if you sold some, like say August 1st, that's so be it. But you're going to look at what is your highest inventory. You cannot include any cows that have already delivered or calved, or any bulls that you actually designated as breeding bulls. You can include bull calves that have never bred, and you can include first-time heifers that did not calve during that time period. So again, the dates you're looking at is April 16th through August 31st. So gather your numbers, figure that out, and that's the number you're going to report. The county office, when you call them, they're going to preload this information, and it's on Part E on your cattle. They'll put your numbers in there. I actually found out that we have some producers that actually raise hogs commercially. If that is your case or that situation, they're only those hogs that are going to go to market, not your breeding animals. If you have any sows or boars, those are not included as far as your inventory. It's the same date, April 16th through August 31st. So you get those numbers, we plug them in. The big thing right now, producers ask, what are we being paid as far as the amounts? They're paying a flat rate on your livestock. So again, it goes back to your calves, your steers, your heifers, first year bred heifers, those kinds of situations. They're paying a flat rate of $55 an animal unit. So you can do a basic calculation on that. Your hogs and your pigs, the market animals, they're paying $23 a head. And your sheep, that's your lambs. Anything that's 2 years in the 2 year, 1 year range, they're paying $27 a head. If you have any questions at any time, ask. Okay, the eligibility part. This is the part that's confusing some of the producers. It's not complicated. Let's try to break it down and make it as simple as possible. When you complete our eligibility forms, we're going to go to the CCC 941. That's your adjusted gross income report. When you fill that in, it's going to take the top part. That's what we were cross-referenced with the IRS, that you don't exceed 900,000 gross income. You get that form, you complete the top part, name and address, your social security number, you check off the 900,000 or less, then you sign and date it and turn that in. The CCC 902 is your business file. Real simple. It doesn't require you to complete the whole thing. All you're going to do is complete the name, address, social security number, that you're a U.S. citizen and that you're not a minor, and then you sign and date it and you're done. The what's the other form that we're taking? The 1026, which is your highly erodible land, wetland conservation certification. Again, you don't have to go into the farm numbers, track numbers, nothing like that. It's just a name, address, your social security number, the crop year 2020. You flip it to the backside and you sign and date it and you're done. That's turned in. And then those of y'all that have done business with us, you know that the government requires a direct deposit with your application. If you've never done business with us, you're going to complete what's called an SF-3881. And that's your direct deposit form. You can either take the blank form when you get it from the county office and take it to your banker to fill it in, or just take a voided check from wherever your account is, write void on there, and then attach it, and then we're good to go. So again, I'm going to go through those forms. The application is the AD 3117. Okay, mark that. That's your CFAP 2 application. Livestock numbers, your inventory of your calves, your steers, your heifers, April 16th, August 31st. The highest inventory you had, your highest number you had during that time period. Even if you sold some, at least make sure that you count all of them. If you had any calves that dropped during that time and they're a month, 2 months, you're going to count them. Okay, keep that in mind. The next thing, the AD 1026, your highly erodible wetland certification. Again, just the name and address, the crop year, social security number. You just put the last 4 digits, turn the page over, sign and date it, and that's good. The CCC 902, your business file. Again, that's just the name and address, social security number, the crop year. Check off that you're a U.S. citizen, you're not a minor, sign on the bottom and date it, and you're done. The CCC 941, your AGI certification, that you don't exceed the 900,000, name, address, social security number, crop year 2020, check off the box, 900,000 or less gross income, sign and date it, turn that one in. Then the SF-3881 for your direct deposit. Again, you can either have your lender, wherever you do your banking, that they fill it out, or you just attach a voided check. Does that make it simple, Omar? Basic information?
Yes, Chris.
Okay, any questions from anybody? I don't want to complicate this too much.
Okay, are there any questions? Let me go ahead and check the chat box, Chris, just in case
Sure,
somebody
sure.
no questions. And that's what we'll do this morning as we move on to other speakers. If you have a question, just go ahead and put it in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and get to that question once the speaker finishes talking. So. I don't see anything. Any questions from anybody?
I do have a question to the group. Is there any type of livestock other than beef cattle, or that anybody has at the moment, that you're considering applying for? Because we do have other animal units, like we do cover llamas, alpacas, bison, as long as they're for commercial use.
Okay, Chris. There's two. One of them, I guess, is poultry and goats. There's some folks that are probably thinking of putting those on the application. And another question is, when does it end?
It ends on December 11th of this year.
Okay.
The application period. Okay, now if you're raising chickens, they're listed on our application as broilers. So whatever you have listed as broilers, we're going to take the number of per head. That's the number we're going to plug in. Now it does allow for eggs. If you're an egg producer, they have 4 categories: dried eggs, frozen eggs, liquid eggs, and shell eggs. So I actually found this out, Omar, that we have producers that they sell eggs that are already cracked and delivered, like liquid eggs. You know, they go to restaurants, things like that. If you're an outright egg producer, they would be shelled eggs by the dozen. That's the way you record that number.
Okay. What about quail, Chris? There's a question here about quail.
Yeah, the only thing is that quail has to be commercially produced. I think I saw that on our listing. Hold on, let me make sure, because that came up. Yeah, quail is included as other livestock as long as they're producing it for food, fiber, fur, or feathers. So
Okay.
the producer has that. Yeah, goats is also since that's a question. Yeah, as long as they're raised commercially for food, fiber, fur, or feathers. In other words, not for show goats, but they're actually raising them.
Great.
There's, what else do we have on here? Geese. I'm talking about things in our area. Geese, rabbits. As long as they're raised commercially for food, fiber, fur, or feathers, as they call it. Make sure they get their numbers on that. That's the same time period. And the way, okay, this is the way we're going to list that if you're going to inquire about your goats. What was your goat sales in 2019? We're going to take the total dollar amount. So when you calculate that from January 1 of 2019 to December 31 of 2019, if you sold goats commercially, that's the number we plug into this, because it's going to pay you a factor. If you're selling quail, the same thing. It's going to be a dollar amount. And let's see, what's the other question that came up, Omar?
The other question is, how do you put value on poultry?
No, poultry is by head for 2019. What was your production of poultry by broilers in 2019? And I know this is a 2020 program, but they're comparing your loss this year to what you produced in 2019. Perfect. Livestock, beef livestock, and hogs and sheep is for this year during that time period. Poultry, quail, poultry's by head compared to last year. That's your chicken broilers, and your goats and your quail. That's based on your 2019 total commodity sales. So that's a dollar amount. And the way I suggest to producers, whatever you're reporting on your Schedule F, I'm not a tax consultant. I will tell you that usually gives you a good idea of what your total commodity sales are going to be that you report to us. That makes sense, Omar?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Chris, I've got a question that maybe somebody may not have asked, but are you all open to the public, or do they have to schedule an appointment with you? How does that work
Yeah,
right
we're
now with the
still,
coronavirus going on?
yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up. I wanna explain that the way the three agencies, Rural Development, Farm Service Agency, and NRCS are right now, we have a guideline that's set by the USDA, and they call it gating stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. They take factors into account with your county, and Cameron County, Hidalgo County, Willacy County went back to gating, which means we had a limited number of employees in the office, and we are closed to the public. The way we function right now is through phone calls. So you call us, and most offices are operating with a Dropbox or their mailbox, where we pre-fill the information that you provide, and then we put the packet together and put it in our mailbox, and you come and complete it. We do ask that customers that come to us during this time period bring their own pen. That way you take the pen with you. We did at one point, we did go into stage 1, and then they withdrew it recently because there was an increase in numbers of cases, Omar. So I know Hidalgo County was close, and then they got pulled, and then here in Cameron County we were close and we got pulled. And stage 1 basically authorizes all the employees. Stage 2 authorizes some customers through limited access, and stage 3 would be by appointment only in the office, but we're not even there yet. So it's a good question, but right now we're still closed to the public. Actually, there's a question about Stark County. Stark County was real close to stage 1, and then they got kicked back to gating, so they're still handling everything through a Dropbox, through phone call, and they're getting the packets together. Any other questions? I hope this answers some of the stuff you have.
And they're asking for a phone number. I know that the Stark County TISA is 956-487-5598. And I don't know about Cameron County. Maybe Chris could share that with us.
Sure. Cameron County is 956-399-1311. Edinburgh office is 956-381-0916. I can't remember the Willacy County one.
There you go. Vidal listed the Stark County one up on top. There it is.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. If there's any more questions, I'm sure you're going to stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes just in case. Or
sure,
you
absolutely. I'm running back to my office shortly. I came over here to Vidal, to Marco's office, and I'll be on for a few more minutes. And guys, I want you to understand something. Please talk to your neighbors and get the word out. This program is for you. This is not something that we're limiting this program. We want everybody to apply that can apply. This is funding that the government provided to compensate for this economic loss right now. And if you have any questions, regardless if you're in Stark County, Zapata County, Duval, Jim Webb, you have a cousin, something out there, have them call us. I mean, I'll discuss it with anybody. It doesn't take that long for us to tell you on the phone, Omar. So, we don't want to deny somebody an eligibility situation here. Okay.
Perfect. And thank you, Chris. And Vidal has listed the numbers of all the county offices in the chat box, so y'all can if y'all need to go ahead and write that somewhere, have any questions for Chris, just give him a call. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker, but before we do that, we advertised in our flyer that we're going to be giving away 10 $20 gift cards. So at this point in time, for those people that are attending, we're going to go ahead and issue out 2. And so Nilda is going to be, she's got all your names in a little box or a little hat, and she's going to pull out 2 right now. What we would like for you to do is in the chat box, go ahead and, or I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and put my phone number, my cell phone number, and you text me your mailing address. That way we can go ahead and mail that to you. So just check if your name gets called, you text me at this number, your address, and I will get that card to you in the mail. Okay, so it's already there. The number is 956-500-4073. Okay. So Nilda, you want to go ahead and pull out the first one?
Okay, first name is David Day.
David?
David Day. I don't know if you can see
Okay,
it.
David. Okay, you're the first one to get the $20 gift card. So if you don't mind, at that number that I listed, 956-500-4073, text me your mailing address and your name. That way we can get that card to you in the mail.
Okay, second name is Jorge Andrade.
Okay, Jorge, so same with you. Go ahead and text to that phone number, to the 956-500-4073, your name and your address, and we will get those gift cards sent to you. And at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ronnie Zamora. Ronnie is a CEP agent in Willacy County that is also helping us with today's meeting. And I failed to mention during the introduction, but Vidal and Romeo there in Hidalgo County, we all kind of pulled resources and put this thing together. So they're going to be introducing some of the speakers this morning. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ronnie, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Welcome everybody to our program this morning. Our next presenter that we have is going to talk to us about the PRF insurance program, but he's going to mainly speak about a tool that he has kind of worked on and put together. His name is Dr. Samuel Zapata. He is our Extension Agriculture Economist with the Texas A&M Agrilife Extension Service here in our district. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Samuel. And if you all have any questions, I guess towards the end of his presentation, we'll do the same. We'll ask some questions at the end of his presentation. Some of y'all can put some questions on the chat box, and we'll go back to the chat box and answer those questions. So Samuel, let's go ahead and kick it off to you.
Yeah, good morning. I hope you can hear me. Let me see if I can share my screen. Probably you need to give me access to that, Ronnie.
Okay, Omar, do you have?
So I think I do not have access yet.
Okay, we have Omar on mute, but I think he's the host.
Okay, I'm sorry. There we go.
Can you share? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it, Dr. Zapata.
Excellent. Okay, let me go full screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So, well, good morning and thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to participate with all of you. My name is, as Ronnie mentioned, Samuel Zapata. I'm the district economist for Agrilife, located in South Texas at the West Laco Center. So if you have any questions about this program or any other thing that you think that I can help you, please let me know. So for the PRF program, I divide my presentation into two parts. The first one, I'm gonna try to go step by step on what is the PRF program, so you have a better understanding of the program and how the program works. And then at the end, I'm gonna show you some preliminary results, as Ronnie mentioned, of a decision tool that I am creating to assist farmers to better or to be more efficient when they participate on the PRF program. So let's start with the PRF program. So as you may know, the PRF program is an area-based program to protect farmers or producer of perennial crops, has to be perennial pastures, rangeland, and forage. And it protects farmers against the risk of forage loss caused by the lack of irrigation. So, and it is an area-based program because it doesn't depend on your own experience, particularly on the yield and amount of precipitation that you have on your property, but it's more on the precipitation level at the grid where your property is located. So let's talk more about the grids. So the PRF program uses a grid system to somehow forecast or estimate the amount of water that you receive during a particular time through the year, and divide all the participating or qualifying acres into different grids. Each grid or square is about 17 by 17 miles. That's the size of each grid. And typically, your acres will be allocated typically to one or several grids, depending on where your farm is located. Just to give you an example, those are the grids available for South Texas. You can see here we have the border. And in our location, we have two particular restrictions that are applicable to our case. The first one is the zone of the grids located near the border, where most of the area is on the Mexican side. Those grids do not qualify for the program. And the other restriction is also those grids that most of the area is represented by water bodies like lakes or in this case the ocean or the Laguna Madre. Typically those grids also won't qualify for the program. So for this example, we're gonna focus on grid 7329. This is where the Agrilife Center is located in Weslaco. So the results that I'm gonna show you are applicable to this particular grid. However, they can be extended or to any other qualifying grid. One thing that is different from this program is that it uses a rainfall index, okay, to somehow forecast the amount of water that you receive. So the rainfall index can be very different from the actual amount of precipitation that you receive. And how the program estimates the rainfall index, basically they use the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration data back from 1948 to the current data. So they have about 70 years or more of rainfall data, and that's the data that they use to estimate the index. And the other thing that is important to mention is that this index, this rainfall index, is calculated for each grid, and within the grid, it is calculated for 11 intervals, 2 months intervals. We're gonna talk more about that in the next minute. So this map on the left of your screen, you can see different dots in the US map. Those represent the numbers of weather stations that they use to estimate precipitation. So the red dots represent that they had 6 or more, and the blue ones at least 1. The other thing is that, assuming that this is your grid, and the first thing is that the program used at least 4 different weather stations to estimate the amount of precipitation on your grid, and the precipitation is estimated at the center of the grid. So that's why you can have different amount of precipitation in your area compared to the ones that the program use. And the closest the weather station are to the center of the grid, the more important the information that is provided by that particular location. So the other thing about the rainfall index is that a value of 100 represent the historical average level of precipitation. So values below 100 means that for that particular interval and grid, the precipitation level was lower than the historical value. Saying, for example, that you have a rainfall index of 90, it means that for that particular interval, the precipitation was 10% lower than the historical mean. And the same for when you have values greater than 100. That means that the amount of precipitation that was received was higher than the historical mean. So for example, a value of 115 means that you receive, or that grid received 50% a higher precipitation than the historical mean. And again, the rainfall index is reported in 2 months intervals, and those are the 11 intervals that are available. You see January, February, then you have an overlapping for February, March, April, and so on. So that goes from January to December. So basically it covers the entire year. So if you are wondering how's the precipitation pattern in the Rio Grande Valley, in the lower Rio Grande Valley, so in this data I summarize the precipitation data from 1948 to 2019. And as you know, we had basically 2 peaks of higher precipitation levels during May and June. And then again in September on average, those are the 2 times when we have the highest precipitation. And just keep in mind that the program basically is trying to protect you against the cases when the precipitation level is less than the average. Okay, so you can see that, so for some grids there is a lot of variability compared to other months where the precipitation is more or less more stable with a lower variability. So next, for our example, the grid, this is again just for the grid 7329. We see again here on the vertical axis we have the rainfall index, and in the horizontal axis we have the 11 available intervals. You can see that the historical average is represented by a value of 100. The line, this orange line, represent the average value of the index for the past 5 years. So you can see that on average during February and March, during the last 5 years, the index has been greater than the average. However, during the other intervals, like from June, July to probably September, October, on average, on the recent history, the index has been lower than the average. And you can see again the bar, blue and red bars represent, the blue one represent this year index, as well as 2019 index represented by the blue bar. So you see that basically during the summer months, when we have the hurricane and high precipitation in both years, you see that the index was in some cases higher than the historical mean, but most of the time they are about the same. So as a producer, your goal is to identify those intervals that may have the highest chances of a lower precipitation. So your coverage level is based on different factors and parameters. And basically here what I did is that I classified them between 2 groups. The first group in black, those represent those parameters that are given. So basically you cannot change those parameters. For example, where your farm is located, or what are you producing, haying or grazing, as well if you have irrigation and if you have some sort of different organic practice. So those parameters are given. However, as a policy holder, you have the option to tailor your policy to better represent your needs. So the first parameter is the coverage level. That value goes from 70 to 90% in 5% increments. And the coverage level is really important, one, because that represents the trigger level for you to receive an indemnity, and also the premium that you will pay is correlated with the coverage level, which means that the higher the coverage level that you select, the higher the premium that you need to pay. On the other hand, also, the subsidy provided by the government is lower as you increase the coverage level, as you will see on the next slide. And also then they have the productivity factor. It goes from 60% to 150 in 1% increments. And basically this one is to better represent the value of your production. So they have they provide the value for the county, and if you think that your value of production is higher than the average value in the county, then you can pick a different productivity, a higher productivity factor, or a lower productivity factor in case that the value of your production is lower than the county value. And the other parameter that is really important is how you allocate the percent of value, or basically what are the intervals that you're gonna use, and how much weight or importance are you gonna give to each of those intervals. So the first restriction there is that you are allowed to allocate 100% across the 11 intervals, but there are some restrictions. The second restriction is that there is no overlapping. So as you remember on my previous slide where I showed the different intervals, you see, can you still see my screen?
No, we can't.
Okay.
It went to another.
Let me see what happened. Sorry for that, I don't know what's happened. Let me close this one. Can you see it now?
There, just put it on the presentation. There we go. It's good.
Okay, so we were talking about the percent of value. So you have 100%. You cannot do or select intervals that includes the same month, so no overlapping there. And also the minimum that you can allocate to an interval that you select is 10%. And in Texas, the maximum share that you can allocate is 50%. So keep in mind those restrictions. So the next one is the subsidy level. As I mentioned, the higher the coverage level that you select, the lowest the subsidy that you will receive. So for example, if you pick 70% coverage level, the premium you will receive a 59% subsidy. However, if you select the highest value of coverage level 90, you only receive a 51% subsidy. So these are, next one are the formulas. I don't want to go through the formulas, just want to show you that those are the different, how the program works. That's how you estimate the net return. And my point here is that really the level of the parameters that you select, the percent of value, coverage level, productivity factor, as you will see, they will have a big impact on the premium, subsidy, and final return received. That's important for you to make a good selection of the parameters, because depending on those parameters, that will have a direct impact on the indemnity payment that you will receive at the end. So let me illustrate all we have been discussing in this example again for the 7329 grid, and just keep in mind that you will receive a payment every time the index level is below the trigger level, which is the coverage level. So in this example, we are using data from 2019. We are assuming that we have 100 acres is for haying and it is irrigated. I select an 80% coverage level and I stick with the 100% productivity factor. That means that I am trying to secure or to protect $60.60 per acre. So this is the maximum amount of value or indemnity that I will receive in the case that I have zero precipitation. Okay, so this is the maximum value. Again, if you change the productivity factor, then you can increase this value proportionally. And in terms of the intervals, I decide to pick those 4 intervals, and also I decide to assign the same weight or importance to each of them. In this case, 25%. So I assign 25%. When I add up all my weight or percent of value, that's equal to 100%. So let's see this example. So the first one is that here you have the intervals. Remember that we pick some of them. This is my trigger level because I use an 80% coverage level. So every time an index value is less than the coverage level, I will receive a payment that will be proportional to the difference. So for example, in next one, you see January and February, those 2 months, the first 2 intervals, I didn't use it. So in those cases, those are irrelevant to my selection because I did not use it. However, I use March, and you see that in the case of March, the index value for March, April was less than the coverage level. So in this case, I will receive a payment that will be proportional to this difference. So April, May is not allowed for me because I already picked that one. And remember, you cannot select intervals that include the same month, what we call overlapping. Then May, June, this is another interval that I pick. However, in this case, the actual index value was higher than my trigger level, 80%. So in this case, I won't receive any payment for this particular selection. So June, July is not allowed. Then I select June, August. You see, in this case, I will receive a payment that will be higher than the payment I will receive for March, April, because the difference between my trigger level and the actual value of the interval of the index was bigger too. Then August, September is not allowed because I already picked that one. And the last interval that I picked was September, October. And again, you see in a small, a little bit lower than the trigger level. In this case, I'm gonna receive a payment. So the last 2 intervals are not relevant in my case because I only picked these 2 for. So of my selection, I will receive a payment on 3 of them. And on this particular interval, I won't receive any indemnity payment. So the calculations, you see here the 4 intervals that I select. The first one is the amount of protection. You remember the $61 per acre that I am trying to protect, and because I'm having 100 acres, those are the values. I also allocate the same amount, 25%, so I distribute this value evenly across the 4 intervals. Payment factor, this is proportional to the difference between the trigger level and the actual indemnity payment. You see here the highest payment factor, so I'm gonna receive 65% of this value for July, August, and May, June, when the index was higher than the trigger level, I will receive 0. You see here, you see the amount of dollars that I will receive for each of the intervals. Then the premium, regardless if you don't receive anything, you still need to pay the producer premium. And the important thing here is that the producing premium depends on the intervals that you select. So you can see, even if I allocate the same weight to all of them, the premiums are different because there are different risks associated to each of the particular intervals. Net returns, you see $50 here. a negative $133 because I didn't receive anything and I pay $133. And then the loss ratio, basically it's, you can interpret that one as for each dollar that I pay to the for the insurance coverage, I received for in the first interval $1.25. So basically a 25 cents gain for you in this month where you don't receive any payment. So basically for every dollar that you pay for the insurance, here you receive $0 back. However, on average, for each dollar I pay, given my selection, I receive $2.30 back. But the question, or also what I want to show you or to present to you is how important is the PRF program in the Valley. So here I graph the PRF program starting in 2007. It's a very a new program, we'll say, as a new program. And you see since 2007, it has been growing in most of the counties in the Valley. In 2020, over 420,000 acres were enrolled in the program. Probably I will say that this is the highest number compared to any of the other crops in the area. And you see that it is really popular in Stark County, Willacy County, in Stark County, Hidalgo, and Cameron. In Willacy, sorry, compared to Cameron, where the numbers are the lowest relative to the other counties. Again, the loss ratio in the Valley, those are the average in the Valley. So you see that in the Valley, for every dollar that producers that have been participated in the program, they have been receiving more than what they pay in premiums, with the exception in 2015. I'm guessing that that was a really wet year where you don't receive an indemnity payment. But you see, as long as this is greater than 1, it seems as a good investment because you are receiving more than the value that you are paying in premiums. With that, I hope you have a better idea of how the program works. So now let me try to show you a decision aid tool that I have been working in the last month. And the idea is to assist farmers and ranchers on how to be more efficient at the time of selecting the different parameters. Okay, so but before starting, we need to go through some technical definitions. The first one is the expected value. And the expected value is nothing but the anticipated outcome of a random variable. A random variable basically is a variable that can take different values. And the expected value is equal to the mean of the possible values that that particular event can take. So let's see, for example, where there are 3 different outcomes. You can have a 3, a 5, or a 10. However, the possibilities of having a 3, a 5, and a 10 are not the same. So you have 2 options. In the fair options, all the possibilities will be the same. So in this case, you have a 33% of having a 3, the same probability of having a 5, and the same probability of having a 10. So the expected value, if you decide to use option, the expected value is 6, which means that on average, if you do this 1,000 of times, on average, you will receive a 6. However, there is other option where you have different probabilities for each of the 3 outcomes. And for option 2, on average, if you do this, or if you play this game for a larger number of times, you will receive on average 6.3, an outcome of 6.3. So if you have to decide between those 2 options, probably you're gonna decide option number 2 because the probability is higher to receiving a higher outcome is higher than this one. You see, the expected value is higher, so probably option 2 is preferred. However, there are other considerations that you need to make, and the other one is the risk. Typically, risk is a measure of the variability, okay? And you can see here, for example, this is a bean machine where the different beans have the same, more or less the same chance to be on the different slot of that machine. However, they take different values, okay? And every time you do it, it will take a different values. However, on average, they will be like that. So let's consider this case where we had three different options, three different alternatives, saying three different, for the case of the PRF program, three different parameter selection, three different combination of the possible parameters. All of them will yield the same return. So you will get the same return on average. However, for some options are had a higher variability, you can really receive a high premium with a very low probability, or you can receive a very low payment with a very low probability, but there is still the chance that you can get values around those ranges. So there is a lot of variability compared, for example, to the option in red, where more or less all the time you will be receiving values that are close to the mean of the distribution. So if you don't like to take risks and you want to avoid chances of getting a really low payment, probably you will stick, and most people will select the option in red because it has the same expected value. However, the chances of getting a low outcome are lower as well. So typically, when you start working with risk, the one option and one of the most popular options to somehow manage risk is to combine different alternatives. And how do you know how well can you combine in one parameter or one criteria is the correlation. So basically, here you see the different months or the different intervals and how strong is the correlation that they have. The closest to one is a stronger correlation. However, those values on the blue range, that means they have a positive correlation, which means that those intervals move in the same direction. However, there are also others that move in opposite directions, so they have a negative correlation. And the idea here is basically trying to minimize risk and try to select a combination of the different parameters that basically moves in different directions. In the case that saying if you have a bad outcome for one particular interval selection, then the others may compensate that because they move on opposite direction. However, if you select all of them that are positive correlated, then you have a higher chances of receive a higher payment. However, your risk exposure is higher if the outcome moves against your desire. So the idea here is when we try to combine those two concepts, we develop a portfolio theory. This is a very well accepted theory or a tool in the finance application and investment application. So basically the idea is try to estimate all the possible combinations, in our case saying the possible combinations of parameters that will result in a higher expected return and a lowest risk. So you see here the first one is that we create this efficient frontier. So the higher the expected return you want to have, the highest the risk that you need to take. And all the possible combinations in this line are what we call efficient. So let's see, for example, this efficient portfolio, there may be another combination that will yield the same return as this one in the frontier. However, the level of risk of this combination compared to that one is higher. This one has a higher risk compared to this one, and both provide the same level of return on average. So probably this one is more efficient than this one. The same happened in this case where you have at the same level of risk, you have two different options. This one will yield on average a lower return compared to this one. So for the same level of risk that you are taking, this one is a better option because you will have higher chances of receiving a higher return compared to this one. And all the other combinations below the blue line are inefficient on average because they have or lower return or higher risk. So just to remember how I use that tool for the PRF selection parameters. So basically you have, again, the 5 coverage level that you can select. You have 91 productivity factor from 60 to 150. And then there is 11 possible intervals. If you do the math, there are over 100,000 combinations of those parameters that you can select, and that without including the amount of, or the percent of value that you will assign to each of the intervals. So what I did basically is trying to evaluate all the possible combinations and see which one or which is the best combination that it is associated to a higher return and to a lower risk. So this is the for the grid that we are using, hay and irrigated. Here you have the net return, and here the risk as a measured by the standard deviation. So you see that this is the optimal selection of the parameters, where the higher the return, the higher the risk that you are taking. So compare the blue dot represent the example that we have been discussing, where we have about 25%, and you can see that the example that, or the values that I select for the sample are inefficient, in the case that there are better options that can yield, for the same level of risk, they can yield a higher return, or for the same level of return, you can reduce the risk exposure. So this is an inefficient selection. And the other thing I did, okay, this is for 2019, and then I compare the values to the actual net return. So the blue dots represent basically, if you follow the suggestion of the model, in 2019 you will receive a higher return. Okay, remember that this is the average, but in some cases you can go higher or lower. So what are the combinations associated to the optimal selection? So here you see the distribution of the grids. Those are the grids that I use, and basically the model suggests that you need to use 6 grids for that particular example, and you see here you can match the color to the particular interval that I'm using. And the weight you see, so you put more on some intervals compared to other ones. But what is really interesting is that at the lower return, or at the lower expected return, you use more grids. However, if you are targeting a higher return, then you are using less number of grids, of intervals, sorry. However, by using less number of, a reduced number of intervals, also you increase the risk exposure. So for productivity factor and coverage level, we found that typically you see the blue line represent the coverage level that you select. Most of the grid, or most of the selections, depending on the expected value that you want to go or target, you see 85% seems to be like a good option. As well, the higher the expected return that you are targeting, the higher the productivity factor, which is given by the red line. So we repeat this example for a large number of grids in South Texas, and pretty much we found the same pattern. With that, I will conclude my presentation, and if you have any questions or comments, let me know.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Zapata. Is there anybody that has a question?
Yes, sorry, I do. I just want to state that there was a new rule that got passed in August 2020 that affects our area in particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw that you put that on the chat box, correct? And there's a new rule that allows land that is uninsurable due to the grid location to be insured in the adjacent grid. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you have any other questions for Dr. Zapata, just please put those in the chat box, and we'll try to get those answered. We're going to move to our next presenter, and I'll go ahead and kick it off to Omar.
Mr. Ronnie.
Yes.
Thank you, Ronnie. Before we move on to the next presenter, we'll go ahead and give out 2 more door prizes. So Nilda, if you're there, can you pull out 2 more winners, please?
Yes.
Omar, Vidal has something to say real quick before Nilda does that.
Okay, go ahead, Vidal.
Yeah, I don't know if Dr. Zapata mentioned, but November 15th is a deadline to register for the PRF for 2021. So anyone interested has about 10 days, and you'd have to contact your local crop insurance agent to get in on it. I just thought I'd mention that.
All right, thank you, Vidal. So we've got 10 more days to go ahead and sign up for that PRF insurance. Okay, Nilda, go ahead.
Okay, Aisha Cruz. Aisha Cruz Reyes.
Okay, Aisha, go ahead and send us your mailing address to my cell phone. Just text it to me, and we'll get that gift card sent to you. Congratulations.
Okay, next one is Victor Gutierrez.
Okay, Victor, if you can text it to that phone number, 956-500-4073, we'll get that gift card in the mail to you. So I'm trying to request control, Dr. Zapata, of the screen again, so we can share it with Eric, our next presenter, and I think it needs your approval. I guess he might have left. Romel, do you have any idea how we can do that?
Let me work on that.
Let me see here. So, can you all see? Y'all can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and stop it. And Eric, if you're there, can you pop in?
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
So let me get my screen shared here.
All right. All right, good deal. Before I go ahead and turn it over to Eric, I wanted to introduce him. Eric is our biologist here for Star, Zapata, and Jim Hogg County. And Eric presented this presentation about 2 years ago in San Isidro when we had our ranchers program over there. And a lot of people gave us some real positive feedback for this presentation. And I asked him if he could go ahead and condense it this year and maybe provide it to us in about 20 minutes. And then we'll go ahead and give Eric an opportunity to go ahead and answer any questions after that. So Eric, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Omar. And as Omar said, this is a presentation that I gave a few years ago at the same meeting for just kind of the western half of South Texas. However, I condensed it down a lot to be able to fit the amount of time that we have. So there, you may have some questions. What I took out from this presentation was a lot of the explanation on why a lot of these things are the way they are, and how we came up with these strategies as parks and wildlife biologists. But if you have questions, please just put them in the chat box, and I'll make sure to try to answer everything that I can. So when we're talking about deer harvest strategies, well, this is kind of what we're talking about. You know, when somebody asks us for help, we come up with these harvest strategies for individual ranches, and we talk about, well, what kind of bucks do we need to harvest? What kind of does do we need to harvest? Or do we need to harvest does, and if so, how many? Okay, when do we do this? Do we start shooting as soon as we can at the beginning of deer season? Do we wait towards the end? What do we need to do? And also, of course, everyone has questions about trophies. When do I harvest a trophy? Should I wait until the end of the season, or can I shoot them on the first day of the season? Will I ever see them again if I see them early in the season? Well, it varies quite a bit, okay? So, and of course, with the bucks, What bucks do I keep? How many do I need to shoot? Should I be culling? And does culling actually create a better genetics of deer within a given ranch or a given area? Do I need to shoot spikes? Some people do, some people don't. It depends on your goals. And should I harvest trophies if I'm just starting out my management? So there's a lot of things that go into these decisions, a lot of other variables. Okay, and of course the most important is the habitat. Whether or not that habitat is poor, fair, good, or excellent when considering white-tailed deer specifically. Okay, we do look at the timing of the harvest. Should I shoot bucks early? Should I shoot them late? Should I shoot does early? Should I shoot them late? And why? Okay, environmental factors include stuff like rain. Obviously, western South Texas does not receive as much rain as eastern South Texas. We don't get those coastal showers. Those coastal showers come all the way into Edinburgh, believe it or not. Okay, do we want, as far as the rancher, do we want our goals to focus on quality of animal or quantity of animal? Are we a commercial operation that needs to make sure to shoot X number of animals or have X number of animals available for harvest every single year? Are we just a family operation that really only wants to shoot 2 or 3 deer a year, and that's good enough for us? There's different decisions and different strategies for both of those ends of the management goals. Do we have a certain number of animals that we're managing for? Do we have any data showing how many animals are actually on the property or that use the property throughout the season? How much effort or ability does that landowner or their leasees have to be able to go hunt? Are they only going to be out there 1 weekend, 2, 3 weekends, or is this somewhere where the landowner lives on the property and they're there every single day and they can put in a whole lot of effort? And are they willing, either the landowner or the hunters, the leasees, are they willing to collect harvest data or other data? And do we need to come up with a culling criteria? And if so, how flexible do we need to make that? Okay, so some of the stuff that we look at and we need to remember is that South Texas, our white-tailed deer breed later than almost anywhere else in the United States. Okay, this information here is from a Parks and Wildlife research study that we conducted over 3 seasons. Okay, this is this data is about 10 years old. We're probably going to repeat the experiment and the study once we're able to get some funding to be able to send people all over South Texas to do this again. But look at the numbers on western South Texas, and you can see the orange line down the middle of South Texas. Hopefully you can see that. That is roughly the designation between east and west. The line does move dependent upon the ecosystem in that area. So some areas that line will move west quite a bit, and some areas it'll move east quite a bit. But as a whole, western South Texas, the peak breeding date is December 24th, so Christmas. A lot of hunters in western South Texas already know that. They know that the peak of the rut, when you see almost no deer movement, is December 24th. Whereas in eastern South Texas, where it rains a little bit more and you have a little bit more greener conditions, that peak is December 16th. Okay. Now, regardless of where you are, pregnancy rates of females are 95%. So out of those 3 years, there were, I want to say, almost 1,000 does that were harvested during the summer, and they were checked for pregnancy, and their fetuses were measured to be able to get the date of conception. That's where we came up with the peak breeding dates. Now, those pregnancy rates, 95% of those does had a fetus. And in the areas where they didn't, it was because those doe to buck ratios, there was almost 5, 6, 7 does in some of those areas per buck. Okay. Now, on average, there was 1.5 fetuses per doe, regardless of east or west. Now, the way that broke out is that 1.5-year-old does and 2.5-year-old does usually had single fetuses, where 2.5-year-old does could have possibly had twin fetuses. Okay, depending upon the environment, how well their nutritional plane was. Now, those 3-year-old plus does almost without exception, were bred every single time with twins. Now, looking at our peak breeding dates gives us dates of birth for those fawns. Now, 90% of the fawns in western South Texas are born by July 25th, whereas in eastern South Texas, they're born July 19th. Now, if you combine all of South Texas, 95% of all the fawns being born that year are already born by July 25th, okay, when you combine both sides of South Texas. So this gives us pretty good confidence that all these spikes that are running around are not late-born fawns. They're actually fawns that have just been stunted and they're growing out into spikes. So, and as I said earlier, most 3.5-year-old does and older will be impregnated with twins. Now, what influences our rut? Believe it or not, it's not cold weather. That's what puts us in a deer blind to be able to see what the deer are doing. So what actually influences it are some biological conditions. So the photo period, that's the number of hours of daylight within our 24-hour day. So when it gets closer to 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime, that's what actually starts the process of does coming into estrus and bucks as a response of that estrus going into rut. Okay, now the exact timing is a combination of that photo period as well as the animal's nutrition and the herd demographics, as far as buck to doe ratios, densities, and that sort of stuff. So does in poor condition will breed later because it takes them longer to be able to get into condition to where those does can actually be receptive. Now, doe fawns will breed in good nutritional conditions. So in really, really wet years, where they're able to eat a whole lot and get a whole lot of nutrition, they will breed. Now, one thing that's kind of weird is that does in poor conditions tend to produce more bucks. So you tend to see in poor years, we tend to see more bucks born. Now that's a good thing and it's a bad thing because yes, there's more bucks and more bucks to choose from later on, but those bucks are born into poor conditions, which means they're going to be stunted at some point in time or to some extent throughout their entire life. Now, the average breeding date of older does does not vary as much as it does in the younger does. We talked about the age ratios already. So how many fawns will a buck produce annually throughout its lifetime? It's actually a lot less than you would think. And also, does the age of a buck influence its success in breeding does or multiple does? So we're going to look at 3 studies from the South. All of them, all this highlighted area is in agreement through all 3 studies. So starting with Mason Mountain in Central Texas, of all ages and antler quality have the potential to be successful breeders. DeYoung et al., which was in South Texas, breeding is spread out among large number of bucks. 11% year-and-a-half-old bucks, 2.5-year-old bucks bred 22% of the does, and 3.5-year-old plus, which is the largest age group, obviously bred the largest number of does. And look right below that, highlighted, there is no relationship between antler characteristics and breeding success. Same thing with this 3rd study. Breeding was spread out among large number of bucks. So 65% of the offspring in that study were sired by bucks 3.5 years old or older, which is pretty darn close to Dr. DeYoung's research as well. And 35% of offspring were sired by bucks that were 1.5 or 2.5, which is right along lines with Dr. DeYoung again. And again, it says no relationship between antler characteristics and breeding success. So that means that the biggest buck on your property is not always breeding the most number of does. And at the same time, that smallest buck is not always breeding the least number of does. Okay. The next thing that we look at is multiple paternity occurred in 16 to 28% of successful breedings. That was from Mason Mountain, and from Sumner's et al., multiple paternity was high. 25 were sired by 2 bucks. That is very, very common. We talked about 3.5-year-old does that are almost always impregnated with twins. Those twins are not always sired by the exact same buck. Okay, it's very common for them to be sired by 2 completely different bucks. So, the degree of intensity applied determines your success in a management program. That's really with everything. If you're able to put in the time and the effort, then you will see larger bucks and bigger bodied animals later on down the road. Now with deer, of course, we're managing for 5, 6.5-year-old male deer. And so we have to remember 1 year worth of management is not going to change a 5-year-old animal. Those animals have to grow up from birth all the way through maturity, enjoying the additional nutrition and whatever management technique you are applying for them to be able to express all of that within their bodies. Okay, so unfortunately, it's very difficult. So most deer managers can't or just don't want, because of time, to reach the intensity level needed to improve the deer herd. So there's a whole variety of different types of ranches and situations that you can be in on what drives the goals of your deer management. So we've come up with what we've called the corral continuum. You have the 2 complete sides, opposite ends of the spectrum. On one side, you have very, very large, low fenced ranches. Okay, those animals are not hard to manage, but they're not easy to manage either, because there's usually not very many of them. It doesn't take a whole lot of input to maintain what you have, because those animals can move off of the property and onto others and move naturally the way they would without fences to areas where they need to find water, to find food, to find bedding, to find as large a home range as they're supposed to have. And then you have in the middle somewhere, you have smaller high fenced ranches. And what's small? It varies. It varies on the environment at hand, what the type of area you have, whether it's all grass or whether it's all brush. It depends on what you have and what the deer need. Okay. And then on the complete other side of the spectrum, you have a deer pen. You have a very small, high fenced area where the deer cannot get out, and you have almost all of the different factors managed for. You have to care for them. You have to feed them almost every day. If you don't have feeders that are big enough, you have to make sure that they don't fight with each other. You do a whole bunch of different things. It's a whole lot of input. Okay, so you just have complete different sides of the spectrum. So when we're managing, whether we agree with it or like it or not, we're always managing for either quantity or quality, or somewhere in between. Okay, so when we're managing for quantity, okay, we don't shoot that many deer. We want to leave what's out there because we want to be able to have plenty to choose from, plenty to view, and plenty to shoot when we're wanting to shoot a lot. Usually that also includes only harvesting bucks. Those does are the ones that make the fawns, and so if you want a lot of deer out there, then you can't shoot those. So we keep them. Now, unfortunately, that leads to a whole different set of problems later on down the road. But if we're low fence, you could potentially do that with those animals leaving if needed. Now, when we're managing for quality, we're usually collecting data, okay, conducting deer population surveys. We need to know what's out there so we know how many to take off, how many is too much. We're harvesting surplus deer to maintain a suitable density below what that habitat's carrying capacity is, and that carrying capacity changes month to month, year to year, day to day even. Okay, so what we do is we pick a low carrying capacity where we know that that property can carry at very minimum that many animals, and that's what we manage for. That way that there's an overabundance of nutrition for those animals to experience throughout their lifetime, allows them to perform better. And of course, since we're doing this for trophy bucks, we harvest those trophy animals once they reach maturity or beyond. So when's the best time to shoot the deer? Well, like everything else, it depends, okay? But for most people's goals, This is usually fits it very well. The best time would be for culling management bucks, start the first day of the season that you're allowed to shoot bucks, and remove them all before December 15th, because again, December 16th on the eastern side of South Texas was the peak breeding. Of course, on the western side, it would be December 24th. Trophies, wait till the last day of the season. Absolute last time that you're going to go hunting. Okay, now does start around Thanksgiving and remove every single one of them before December 15th. Again, because that's the peak breeding for eastern South Texas. For western South Texas, that would be December 24th. Now, that's not a lot of time to do all of this. And like I said here and what's listed, this is the absolute best time. But we don't live in a perfect world. So what's more practical is what we do is we start shooting bucks as soon as we can. We remove all of those bucks that are not wanted on the ranch, that are not going to become that trophy buck. We remove them all just throughout the season. Shoot until you don't see any more. Okay. Our trophies, wait as long as it's practical. If you know that buck comes out early in the season and you never see him again year after year after year, well, then take him early in the season. Okay. Remember, all those studies that have been conducted, those bucks really do not sire as many fawns as we would like to think sometimes. Okay. Now for does, we don't start until Thanksgiving. And the reason being is that those does are still milking their fawns. And if you remove them through hunting, if you remove that fawn's mother, then what's going to happen is that fawn is going to be permanently stunted in some fashion or form for the rest of its life. Okay. So we start around Thanksgiving and we keep shooting until we reach the number of does that we need to for that specific property. Okay. So kind of as a summary, deer biology itself, wildlife biology, does not allow for an individual female to be unproductive. Okay, these animals usually die in the wild, or almost always die in the wild, before a female loses its ability to be reproductive. Okay, the rut itself is affected by buck to doe ratios or doe to buck ratios. Fawns will breed around March or April if they're going to breed. Usually in South Texas, they do, but they actually breed a little bit earlier. Any fawn orphaned before proper weaning will be stunted permanently. That first year of life is very important for every single mammal on Earth. And if something happens to where its nutrition is removed or reduced, it will be stunted regardless. It is better for the herd as a whole for a pregnant doe to be taken or harvested from the herd as opposed to a doe that it's still milking. Because again, you're going to stump that animal. You need to take care of the animals that are already on the ground and already born, as opposed to those that are just being conceived or have not been born yet. Because there's lots of things that can happen to those fawns even before birth, and then from birth all the way through becoming a 1.5-year-old animal to become a successful breeding animal. Okay. In most cases, culling does not lead to genetic improvement. Unfortunately, you can't influence genetics at a pasture level. Again, you get into that corral continuum. Yes, in a very, very small pen, you control all the breeding, you control a lot of the stresses of life for that animal. You can control and begin to show genetics. But the problem is that in a pasture situation or a full ranch situation, there are way too many factors that are not controllable, and every animal on that property will not be able to show its full genetic potential. None of the wild animals ever reach their full genetic potential, and because of that, we cannot influence genes. So plant diversity itself is the most important habitat measure, because the more diverse the plant community, the more diverse the food is for those animals. And they need to be able to have good, diverse food throughout the entire year, because their nutritional needs change throughout the entire year and season. Deer do prefer forbs, which a lot of us call weeds, over everything. Not all weeds, but the stuff that they do prefer is usually very high in protein, in crude protein, and is a whole lot more nutritious than anything else we have for plants. However, South Texas does rely on the brush species to feed the wildlife, because that is what is there and what grows year in, year out, whether we're in a drought or whether we're not. Okay. Now, the fruit of a plant, the little berries, they usually contain little to no crude protein, but it's more nutritious usually in other things other than protein compared to the rest of the plant. Deer themselves, they can only process up to 18% crude protein. The rest is pooped out. Okay, and that's their entire diet. Now, carrying capacity, of course, does change from day to day, month to month, year to year, and it is solely based on the plant diversity within the area and the amount of rain we get. And the best thing to do, of course, is after collecting data from harvest data, weights, ages, body conditions, we use that to let the deer and the habitat tell us what condition they're in. Okay, and that's really the best and the only way to see whether or not our management techniques are actually improving those animals or whether it's just maintaining them. Okay, and with that, I'll take any questions that we have.
Any questions from anybody?
Was there anything in the chat box?
I'm checking the chat box, Eric. I don't see anything.
No, I don't either.
Eric,
Yes.
this is Romeo. I mean, this is just my observation from the past couple of weekends that I've been sitting out doing deer counts. I've seen some fawns, buck fawns, already protruding from their nubs. You know, little, I guess, little pencil points. Is that because they were born early, or because of the rainfall that we've gotten since March till now, and the nutritional factors in the property that have given those buck fawns a little bit more nutritional potential to push out a little bit more?
So it's not probably because they were born early, because really, I mean, those average dates don't change much. They do change a little bit from year to year because it is an average, but they don't change a lot. What that probably is there is a condition in some fawns called infantile antlers. Okay, and you'll get little bitty antlers. They look like a button buck. Okay, so they'll actually protrude just a little bit. Now, I've seen some that were fawns, and I've seen some that were actually 1.5-year-old bucks that are just really small size and body. I've actually taken quite a few of them just to test over the years whether or not they were fawns or 1.5 years, and most every single one I've shot has actually been 1.5 years with protruding antlers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right, Eric. Well, we appreciate all the information. If there are any other questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker. But before that, let's go ahead and give some more door prizes away. I think we've got 2 more. Nilda, do you want to go ahead and do that right now?
Sure. Okay. Lorena Garcia.
Okay, Lorena, please go ahead and text me your mailing address to 956-500-4073.
Okay. Next one. Sixto Flores.
All right, Sixto, send me your mailing address, and we'll get those gift cards sent to you. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Romeo. I think Romeo is gonna introduce Dr. Paschal's presentation. So Romeo, go ahead.
Okay, guys. Good morning. What we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Joe Paschal. He is a professor and extension livestock specialist for Texas A&M Agrilife in districts 9, 10, 11, and 12. Dr. Paschal had a previous engagement that he had to be in today, so was not able to make it, but he was gracious enough to provide us with a recording of his presentation. If there's any questions after the presentation, please put them in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. Thanks. Omar, are you gonna, do you have the presentation to turn it on?
We're going to talk about some generalities, not a whole bunch about specifics. We'll talk about some specific vaccines and things such as that, but we're basically going to talk about what it takes to hold on to your calves, your wean calves as stocker cattle, and sell them later at maybe a later age and hopefully a heavier weight through the auction barn, or maybe even feed them yourself. There we go. So it takes a minute for teams to sort of catch up with the next button. So this is just a set of calves that perhaps any one of us could be weaning. It depends. Maybe, you know, sort of a mixed lot, but typically out of the same bull or same types of bulls, different types of cows. And Vidal's wanted me to talk about if you save your own calves. So really, we're going to talk mainly about native calves. So those are calves that we raise ourselves, and we're going to maybe we've got more grass, and maybe we buy a few more calves. Maybe some of those calves are our neighbors' calves. They'd still be native to the United States, native to Texas. So an opportunity that if you have lots of grass and you don't want to keep your own calves, and you can buy calves. You can buy calves from Mexico through a broker. And so, you know, we won't talk about how that's done, but that is an option. Steers versus heifers. So if I'm going to keep calves that I've weaned, I'm going to make sure that all my male calves are castrated. And I'm only going to keep steer calves because they bring more value. Steers bring more value at any weight than bulls, but especially after we've added 100 or 150 pounds to them, the discount for intact bulls gets to be pretty severe. Steers will gain faster than heifers, and so that's something to think about. Some of us will keep some of our heifers back anyway for replacements, but so steers will tend to grow a little bit faster. Heifers tend to get a little bit fatter, but so those are some things to consider. There's a whole host of value determining factors we'll talk about in a minute. Sometimes you might want to sell some of your better calves right away because the price for them. Maybe keep some of your plainer or more common calves back and use those to utilize that extra grass. And then, of course, you need to think about things like muscling and frame and health of those cattle. And the health aspect, as I said, you know, what we want to do is we want to wean those calves, giving them opportunity to get the ball out and to quit hollering for their mama, to get some vaccine in them. We'll talk about those vaccines, but the ones that we're talking about primarily is to make sure that all these calves have a blackleg shot or blackleg complex, a 7-way, and that they're boosted. All right, so 1 shot, and then 4 to 8 weeks later, they get their 2nd shot according to the label. I'd also like to see these calves get a 4-way respiratory vaccine. So a 4-way respiratory includes IBR, infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, BRD, bovine respiratory disease, BVD, bovine viral disease, PI3, parainfluenza type 3, and BRSV, bovine respiratory syncytial virus. And you can buy that product and a killed product or modified live. I'd recommend that since you're going to keep them around next to your pregnant cow, that we use a kill product and again get 2 doses in them as soon as possible after weaning. And then of course you may want to deworm them, all right, and take care of external parasites at the same time. And on the steer calves, I'd certainly implant them. So we'll talk about some of those things. Where these cattle come from, we're going to talk about maybe keeping your own cattle, but you could also buy cattle from other people, from a livestock commission company, and you could basically add to. So maybe you have enough grass for 20 or 200, and maybe you only have 10 or 150. So you might want to add to your group. And there's some additional considerations that we'll visit about. So this is my place in northern Jim Wells County, and this is a buffalo grass pasture. At one time, actually, it was a coastal Bermuda grass pasture at one time. And then a succession of droughts turned it into a buffalo grass pasture. And then there's also a good sprinkling of KR blue stem and some native grasses and even some weeds. And so these are some steers from Mexico that were brought in. So it should sort of change your idea about what a Mexican steer looks like. These cattle had a lot of European and British influence in them, a lot of Angus, as you can see, and some Charolais, and even some Hereford and Simmental, but they also had a little bit of here. But if your calves look like your previous slide or like these calves, they certainly can be put on grass and get some gain out of them for maybe about a pound a day in terms of gain of grass like this. You have decide to put in winter pasture or have irrigated pastures, you might get 1.5 pounds or 1.75 pounds a day gain out of those kinds of pastures. Here's another set of steers that are sort of close up, also from Mexico, also on my place, and you can see this was actually on some coastal Bermuda grass before that drought hit. And you see it's sort of a mix. These are a little bit rough shape coming out of winter. So they were wintered on a grass like this, but these cattle gained right at about 1.25 pounds during the winter time on grass. That's pretty darn good, but again, it's sort of in northern Jim Wells County, and we never suffered a really hard freeze. So here's some Brangus females that we kept one year, and again on the same pasture, the same place. This was, you can see that there's actually a tub over here. I travel quite a bit in my job, and so I will put out a tub or two every now and then. I have to realize that those tubs are expensive. They're upwards of around $90 for 225 pounds. And so I sort of put it out there because I know that sometimes I'm not going to get to see these cattle every day or every other day or even every third day. But I have to pencil that in. I have to decide, is it worth the cost? Because these heifers right here will eat about 1 pound of that a day. And so in terms of supplement cost, that's 40 cents. But I also know that it's going to add about 28 hundredths of a pound, almost 3/10 of a pound of protein. And when they have to eat some pretty low quality forage that you see back out here in the pasture, we can actually improve their gain quite a bit. So these heifers, if you'll note, they all have a tag in their ear. They've all been branded, and they all have been vaccinated for bangs. And so this is a little bit different set of cattle. I'm going to go back one than these steers right here. So these steers are all going to go into a feed yard. And in fact, what these cattle were sent to my place, and I was paid on the gain of these cattle. So somebody else that owned the cattle actually took care of the medicine bill and took care of the mineral. My responsibility was to make sure that the cattle had water, okay, and had plenty of groceries, and to report to the owner if any of them got sick so they could come out and be treated. And then, of course, I also had to maintain the fences. So those cattle were going to the feed yard. These heifers, on the other hand, these were mostly straight bred heifers, straight bred Brangus. They weren't registered. So they were going to go into a breeding herd. And so the care of them was just a little bit different. I want you to notice that back here in the corner behind the tub, this is sort of a makeshift trough. I didn't supplement these heifers a great deal. I didn't supplement any of these stockers a great deal. Mainly, I supplemented them to gentle them down so they would come to me so I could look at the cattle. I tried to look at these cattle. This was about a group of about 60 heifers. Those steers, there was about 75. You need to look at them individually 2 or 3 times a week, check for problems, look for any issues in the cattle. So if they're your cattle, you're going to do that anyway. So this is another set. This is actually up near Cuero. This is not mine. These were just some Brayford females that were purchased, and these are a little bit older. So these are yearlings. So most of the time what we're talking about is weanling calves that are 6, 7, 8 months of age. We've weaned them off their mama. We've either bought them, we've kept our own, we've purchased them from an auction barn, whatever. But they're a lot younger in age, whereas these were close to like 12, 14 months of age. And so they're a little bit different. They're a little bit more rugged. They don't require as much attention. But so there's all different sorts of stocker programs. I don't have a picture, but not very far from me in northern Jim Wells County, there was a rancher that basically ran a lot of what we would call stocker cows. So these were older cows, shelly cows, that's a term for thin cows. And they would buy them at the auction barn. They would bring those cows over, put them on winter pasture, and fill them up, put some condition on them, put some bulls out with them, and those cows that were bred at the end of the season, they would go into a calf production. Those cows that were not bred, that were open, they would go to beef processing as cows. They would be heavier cows. They would be worth more per pound, slightly worth more per pound than a thin cow. But where they actually made most of their money is that those cows were heavier. And so there was more pounds of weight that could be sold, and also a slightly higher price. So some of these value determining factors are here. And as I said, we're talking about keeping these cattle for ourselves, from ourselves. We're not talking about going out and buying a truckload of cattle from someplace. But if you are, here's some things to think about. Back grinding means how well have these cattle been prepared? And so these are your cattle. You're going to prepare them well, okay? You're going to make sure that they have the vaccines we talked about, black leg and four-way respiratory, plus dewormer, plus implant in the steers. Right, so you're going to make sure that they're well prepared. But other things that may cause, if you buy cattle, the color of the animal, the fill, okay, whether or not it's got a full belly, whether it's carrying a lot of water, whether or not it has horns. Maybe you have a personal preference. So a lot of people like black cattle, or they like red white-faced cattle, or they like tiger stripe cattle, whatever it happens to be, it can be of value. We talked about vaccinations already. We talked about breed in terms of personal preference. Condition and flesh. You know, I like to see my calves at about a body condition score 4 or 5, very similar, and I'm going to slip back a couple, okay? I want to see calves that sort of look like what you see right here. All right, they're not fleshy, okay? They actually look a little bit thin, but they're hungry and they're lean, and they're going to come out on that pasture and they're going to start eating and they're going to gain. So these heifers are okay. This heifer that you see right here in front, she's a little too fleshy, but if you look at the heifers that are behind her, okay, they have that sort of that same look as we see in those steers in the earlier slide. Frame, I don't want to see really small frame cows, but medium to large frame. So those are cattle that would be ready to be harvested of 1,100 pounds and up, because I want some growth, I want some frame. There's not anything paid for altitude in cattle, so the distance from the ground to the belly has no value. But on the other hand, we do know that cattle that have a breed or a type, they're a little bit framier, tend to gain a little bit. And I like to see muscling in these cattle. I don't want them to look like dairy cattle. I want them to have some muscling, because muscle is what pushes the scales down. We've already talked a little bit about weight. Sex, or gender, steers versus heifers. I want to talk a little bit about weight. Everybody knows that lighter cattle bring more per pound than heavier cattle do. That's called a market slide. And right now in livestock marketing, what's going on, particularly in beef cattle prices, is that the amount of money that's being paid for a fed steer, okay, versus a feeder steer versus a wean calf is narrowing considerably, maybe within about 30 cents per pound. And so there's not a lot of money to be made in buying a lot of really light cattle and trying to turn them into heavier weight cattle, unless you can do it with a amount of cost of gain. And that's because of this market slide has gotten really, really small. One year when I gave this talk, the calves were bringing almost $3 a pound. Okay, y'all remember that several years ago, 2014. And of course, fat cattle were bringing $1.20, $1.30. There was a huge amount of money to be made from $3 to to $1.30. Today, not so much. We talked about frame score just a minute ago, and basically what we're looking for is some cattle that are not really short in terms of stature. We're looking for medium and large frame cattle because we want them to grow. And this is a slide from USDA. This is actually, if you read market reports, and I'll show you one in a minute, they talk about large and medium, or large and medium and small, and they talk about steers and heifers. And so this is the target weight for a large steer, 1,250 pounds. A target weight for a medium frame steer is between 1,100 and 1,250, and for a small frame steer would be less than that. The heifers are about 100 pounds back because females tend to be lighter weight than males do. Heifers tend to also be fatter, okay, and don't gain as fast, and are not as efficient because they reach puberty. But just keep that in mind. So we tend to pay more for steers and heifers, or value steers more than heifers. We tend to have more value attached to large and medium than we do for small. And I think that the fellows in the valley have been doing a long time feeder calf study, looking at auction barn receipts, and this will bear that out. So this is just an old slide from USDA. This slide's probably 50 years old, but it just goes, the point is that just because they're black, it doesn't mean that make them the smallest. Just because they're white, it doesn't make them the tallest, okay? This is a muscle score thickness. And so if you read a market report, in addition to large, medium, and small, you'll see a muscling score. So this is a 1, and essentially a 1 is a very thick steer, very much like a show steer. To be quite honest, in South Texas, we don't have a lot of 1s. Most of our cattle are number 2s, okay? Or perhaps even number 3. Most of the cattle, I would say 80% of our cattle in South Texas are number 2s. About 10% are here, and we have about 10% here. We almost don't have any 4s. So this would be thin, this is thick, or this is slightly thick, thick, slightly thick, slightly thin, and thin. And so if you look at that, what we're trying to do is we want to try to look for cattle that are mostly 2s, maybe a few 1s, maybe a few 3s, because remember, they have muscle, and muscle is what pushes the scales down. Excuse me. So this is just an example. So you see a 3 over here on the side. This is a 2 in the middle, and a 1 over here. Doesn't make any difference what breed they are. It's about muscling score. So let's talk a little bit about quality. So this is actually from an old slide that I borrowed. They don't scan very well, but here we've got 2 steers, and you can see the difference. So this is a pretty nice type E1, 1.5 type of steer that you see right here. And this is sort of like a number 2, number 2.5. So lots of times order buyers use a different scoring system than the USDA frame score and muscle score. And they use a score that goes 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and just basically denotes quality. And so this calf didn't have as much sheath that you see right here. He'd probably be a 1. But because he's got a little sheath and a little ear, he's more like about a 1.5. This calf just lacks muscle. You can see the difference in muscling here. So he's a lower quality calf. He's like a number 2 or maybe a 2.5. You know, they have about the same amount of Bos indicus or Brahman influence, but you can see that the steer on the right has much more marbling than the steer on the left. And you can see that also too in these heifers. These heifers, little difference in terms of breed type, but over here on the left-hand side, we have really sort of like a number 1 kind of heifer. All right, and over here we have like a number 2, 2.5 kind of heifer. So I'll get less gain out of this heifer. I'll get less gain out of this steer, but he's liable to be cheaper as a result. And that's the thing that you have to think about is what's the value of these animals going in, because I have to think about all my costs, all right, and what I'm going to get for them going out. And then here's some black females that came. And believe it or not, the female over here on the right would have a little bit higher value than the female on the left, even if they were identical for every other reason except color. That's because this heifer is a crossbred, and so they know that because of heterosis or hybrid vigor, he's going to do a little bit better. He may not get sick. He's going to grow a little bit faster. She's going to be healthier. This heifer's got some other problems. She's a lot lighter muscle, all right, even if they were the same frame size, and they appear to be, just difference in the picture size. You know, she doesn't have as much muscle, as much depth of body as the heifer on the other. One thing that you have to worry about if you're thinking about keeping your heifers back, even if you castrate your steers, depending on how long you keep heifers on grass at your place, they will come into estrus at some point, and so there is always the potential that they can be bred by your bull or by a local bull that jumps the fence as they start coming into estrus. And so that's something to consider when we think about keeping heifers. So you have to think about what your grazable forage is, how much forage do you have. This is where NRCS has a really good tool, the web soil survey page that can actually help you draw a map of your branch and determine what the grazable acres are and tell you in a good year, and I would say that this is a good year for y'all, okay, how many pounds of forage can be produced per acre. So typically a cow is going to eat about 9,000 pounds of forage, okay, so she'll eat maybe almost 10,000 pounds of forage. So we're talking about almost 800 pounds of forage a month. Stockers are going to eat about 400 to 450 pounds of forage per month. And if you look at this particular pasture right here, you know, we're basically running at about 4,000 pounds of forage per acre. So if I graze it to the ground, okay, I could run a stocker on it for, you know, roughly about 10 days. And so you have to think about, you know, how much forage do you have? How many cattle do you have? How many can you keep? And of course, it's always better to use some sort of a rotational system to allow grass to rest and regrow. And the real key to running stocker cattle on these types of forage programs, all right, is that you're going to run them for a long time. So you may run them for 2 or 3 months. And so you have to make sure that there's plenty of forage out there. You do not want to lizard lick this. You don't want it to look like this cow trail or this water lot trail that's going in here. You don't want it to be bare dirt. You want to utilize about half of what you see here, because you want that grass to regrow so the next time you get good rain, it has a good enough root system that it'll continue to maintain itself. So this is another example, and this is actually at my place. And so this is getting a little bit short. This is actually a lot of coastal Bermuda grass. This is before the drought. So this is another set of steers that were out there. And you see the sort of a mixed type. You don't see their muzzles. My old friend, Dr. Wayne Hensel, was our range specialist for 30-something years here in the valley and in Corpus Christi, and we ran a lot together. And he would always say that you're grazing just about right if you can't see their muzzles. And that's absolutely true, what you see right here. This is a winter pasture. This is actually up the country quite a bit. This is actually a wheat field that was planted, wheat and rye, that was planted just south of Uvalde. And so typically this is a little bit different. Okay? This is actually cost quite a bit more to put in than what you would have in terms of your native grass like you see right here. But if you're lucky that you live in the valley, you don't get any hard freezes, and so you get grass growth year round, you can maintain cattle like that. As you get further north, above Victoria, it starts to get cold and you start to get freezes, then winter pasture is what you need to have. And so that's what they typically use. These pastures are much more highly digestible, much more higher in protein, okay, much more productive, but they don't all grow at once. And so some winter grasses grow early, some grow late. And if you plant them over your regular pastures, your coastal Bermuda grass pastures, along about March or April, you need to graze them pretty heavily. Otherwise, your coastal or your buffalo grass will get set back, okay? Because this will cover up those plants and they won't get any light. But pastures like this, you ought to be able to get 1 3/4 to almost 2 pounds a day in terms of gain, but they are also more costly. Supplementation. So here's some more stockers. So I think this is actually those Brangus females. This is a sort of a mineral feeder that I like to use. I like to use loose mineral, all right, so that I can get some consumption out of it. I've used mineral in a tub, but I have to realize it's a little bit more expensive. Typically, a sack of mineral will last a cow about 6 months, and so it'll last 2 stockers about 6 months. It'll last 4 stockers about 3 months. About 3 months. And so, you know, you figure that you're going to spend probably in the neighborhood of about $12 in mineral on these stockers, and it's important to have good mineral. They need to be able to consume it. You need to be able to protect it from being blown. I really recommend on native grass pastures, sort of like what you see here. This is actually a coastal mix at this time. I would recommend something like a 10 or 8%, or maybe even a 12, somewhere around there, 8 to 12% calcium and around an 8% phosphorus. So I could do a 10 or 12% calcium, 8% phosphorus trace mineral. And I like a loose mineral. I don't like a block. And I'm sort of different than my colleagues. I like a white salt block in there, even though that mineral that you see in here has already got salt in it. I think sometimes stocker cattle just like salt. I'll put them in one of these troughs that you see over here. All right, and so it was sort of a dry winter like today. Obviously, it's better if it were covered, protected from the rain. But the reality of it is, you put that white salt block there. When they stick their head in this, they're going to lick that white salt. I want them to lick mineral. Okay, cows don't have nutritional wisdom. They don't know that mineral is good for them. I want them to investigate it. I might put a little cottonseed, or might put a little ground corn or ground grain sorghum on her, just a little bit to get them to thinking about that they might want to taste it, might want to try it. They don't need very much. About 2 ounces per head per day would pretty much supply all the nutrient needs. This is just a tub. I already told you about it. I have nothing against tubs. Some of them have mineral in them, and that's fine. But just make sure that you're using that tub for a specific purpose. If you're seeing those cattle pretty much every day or every other day, and if you think that they need supplemental protein based on their fecal pads, on the condition of the pasture, then I would sack feed it. And there's a lot of good products that are out there: range cubes, cottonseed meal, even whole cottonseed. I've fed tons and tons of whole cottonseed, because a little bit of additional protein, not much, 2/10 to 4/10 of a pound, so a couple of pounds of range cubes, a pound of cottonseed meal, a pound and a third of a tub like this will improve forage digestibility about 30%, and will improve gains. You almost get a 1-to-1 improvement in gain by supplementing with about 4/10 of a pound of protein. What that means is, on dry grasses, dry forages, if they're short of protein and you feed about 4/10 of a pound of protein, you will increase average daily gains almost 4/10 of a pound. It only works that one time though, okay? You can't feed 8/10 of a pound of protein and get 8/10 of a pound of increased gain. So I just put out, these are just these are those Brangus heifers at 2 different times in their life up here in the top. This is when they first came on board. This is after 90 days down there. So you see a change. Up here, we were feeding some whole cottonseed. All right, and I just sort of knocked those troughs together and they sit there on a concrete block, and down here we're feeding some cottonseed cubes. Just because we called the cattle in, we were looking at them. These cattle were not implanted. They were all tagged. They were all vaccinated, blackleg, and 4-way respiratory, dewormed and deflied and identified, because they were going to go to a program that was going to breed them to Angus bull. So we talked about improving performance all during this, and I just have these down: deworming, horn fly control, implanting. Remember that there's 2 different types of implants: one for a calf, less than 400 pounds, and then 2 different types of implants if you have steers or heifers. Unless you're absolutely sure that that heifer is going to go into a feed yard, I would not implant it. Because if you're planning on running that heifer back through a cell barn, we know that implants will will affect negatively reproduction. Some folks like to feed an ionophore, so there's a couple that are there, Rubinson and Bovatec. What an ionophore does, it shifts the manufacture of what are called volatile fatty acids, which are part of the energy content of forages as they're broken down by bacteria. They're very inexpensive. They have to be fed, obviously. I do want to point out that Rubinson is toxic to monogastrics, okay? So like horses, it's also toxic for wild pigs, but that's not a reason to go feed it because it's very expensive. Bovitec is much safer. Both of them have the same effect, but again, they have to be fed daily. Maybe some sort of a self-limited feeder would work. And we already talked about minerals and protein and so on. Facilities is good. This is my old place in Jim Wells County. We had a set of pens, and when stockers came in, we could watch them and monitor them for a few days, so we could doctor them. We had good pens that we could get the cattle up in, and that's very important because when you first wean those cattle and you keep them yourself, if you've never done that before, after you vaccinate for them, for about 2 weeks, some of them are going to get a little sick. And you need to be able to have some sort of a protocol, a herd health protocol with your veterinarian, hopefully, what to doctor with, how to recognize signs of illness, and to doctor those cattle. And then, of course, water. I don't recommend that you have cattle in the water trough, like water tank up there like you see there. I just took that picture. But cattle do need good, clean water. So wherever you have cattle, and this is a trough of my old place, I made sure that they had good, clean water. They prefer clean water, and they'll do better if the water is clean. They're going to drink about a gallon of clean water a day for 100 pounds of body weight. And so that's really important when you think about your calves. If you got 20 calves and they weigh 400 pounds each, that'll give you an idea that they're going to drink 800 gallons of water a day. And if you got more than that, you need to think about that. So you need to have plenty of good, clean water. We already visited a little bit about health management, recognizing that you need to have a good herd health program. And this is where your veterinarian comes in. You're blessed with having a lot of good veterinarians down in the valley, and I would certainly recommend that you get one involved, not only in your stocker herd health program, but in your cow herd health program. There are problems that you can have, and I just threw some up here. Up here in the top right-hand corner, you see a steer that's got his head caught in the Y of the tree. And right after I stopped and took that picture, I thought I was going to have to go get his head out. And he just lifted his head out and backed up, and he was gone. Over on the right-hand side, we got a calf with a broken leg. So if you've got cattle guards, if you're bringing somebody else's calves in, they may not realize that they can hurt themselves in the cattle guard. So we used to have to fix a couple of legs every now and then. We got that done successfully. Down here, this was Easter Sunday. I had a steer, that's a big steer, 750 pounds, that decided he was going to walk through the cattle guard and maybe eat some of this little bit longer grass on the other side. He didn't break any legs. All right, but that's just the kind of problem. Then, of course, because these cattle drink water and lots of it, you're always going to have water problems, water issues. That was a cold winter day fixing a water line. So lastly, I just want to tell you that you need to think about what's going on in terms of the market. If you're holding your own calves, you need to know what they're going to bring today versus what they might bring next year. Now, this year's been crazy. Everybody knows that. This black line is the trend line for the last 5 years. And I realize this is Oklahoma 400 to 500 pound steer price. All right, but we can pretty much say that that this trend line is going to be the case in any auction barn sale that we see today. All right, so we always get more for our cattle in the springtime, which is why y'all are here, and less for them sometime here in late October when everybody's selling their weaned calves. And so the idea maybe is to hold these cattle here and then sell them over here. And I understand that. You probably won't see the wide pattern that you see here, because if you go back here, this is what 2020 is, and this is 2019. So you can see that early months in 2019, that's the blue line, they weren't nearly as good as they were just a few months later. So that's why it's going to be important to pay attention to the market. Right? Know where the cattle are coming and where they're going and when they're going to go and what your cost of gain is. You need to determine what the break-even price is, and most importantly, you need to know something about weather and grass conditions, and that's not fat, that's actually GRA as a company. So last slide, sort of like stock or economics, we already talked about knowing something about the value, okay? So right here, I did a little quick math, and don't hold me to it, but today, 500 pound feeders are worth about $1.25 a pound, maybe a little bit less where you are, maybe a little bit more. So on a 500-pound calf, that's at $625. And if you're going to hold them till April, okay, they're worth $1.10. Okay, that's the futures that 750 weight calves are going to be worth $1.10. As we get closer to April, we'll know whether that's right or not. We figure that they'll gain about a pound a day. Okay, and actually that's not 700 days. That's actually closer to about 150. All right, so I made a little math error here. So they'll weigh, instead of 700 pounds, they'll likely weigh about 650 pounds. But let's just say if they gained a little bit more, they'll weigh 700 pounds. However, when you sell those cattle, you have a little bit of a shrink, so they'll actually weigh about 679. And based on $1.10, they're going to be worth $747. So my point is that the difference between this number and this number, that $122, that $122 difference has to pay for your grass, because your grass is worth something, your preconditioning, your vaccines, your mineral. It has to pay for trucking. You're going to haul cattle to the sale barn. Medicine, any deads. Hopefully you won't have any, but I can guarantee you that you may have some sicks, and you could possibly have deaths. And so all these things goes out of that $122. So you have to decide whether you have to put a pencil to it. You can pull these market reports at this website, and I just pulled the market report from today. And so you can kind of see how it reads. Here's steers, medium and large ones, 557 pounds are worth $1.40. Okay, so I backed them up a little bit at $1.25. Heifers, medium and large ones, were $1.26. So you can see that heifers are worth $14 or 14 cents less than steers. And then you have heifers, medium and large. All right, so it'll kind of give you an idea of what those cattle are worth. I'm going to stop right there. As I said, this is just sort of an overview of some thoughts to think about in terms of stocker. Holding on some of your wean calves and keep them as stockers. The main thing is to put a value on them coming in right now, get an idea of what it's going to cost you to run those cattle, and then get a projection of what they're going to gain and what that gain is going to be worth when you decide to sell them. And realize that we're not just talking about January or February. We might actually be talking about holding these cattle until March or April. Good luck, and thank you so very much.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on Dr. Paschal's presentation? He did mention to us that if there was any questions that we could go ahead and forward those to him. Okay. If there are no questions, I checked the chat box. There's none there. Nita, would you mind pulling out 2 more winners?
Sure.
Of those gift cards, if you don't mind.
All right. Let's see. We have John Martinez.
Okay, John Martinez, if you don't mind texting me your mailing address, we can go ahead and get that gift card in the mail for you.
Okay. Second one. Juan Garcia.
Okay, Juan, go ahead and text us your mailing address and we'll get those gift cards sent to you. Again, you can text them to 956-500-4073. Next on the agenda is Mr. Joe Aguilar. Joe Aguilar is a special ranger with the Texas Southwest Cattle Raisers Association, and last year he was very instrumental in helping us kick off a landowner program here in Starr County. And this year visited a little bit with Mr. Aguilar and some of the things that were going on, and he said that they're been some, he just wanted to visit about some buyer fraud cases that he's been involved with. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Aguilar at this time. So Joe, are you around?
I'm here. Thank you.
All right.
See if I can get my presentation on there here real quick. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Can you all see it there, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll get started because I know that the lunch bell's about to ring. So I just wanted to touch bases on some issues that we're dealing with, especially because of what's going on in this, basically in this day and age. You know, we live in a world right now that you could basically buy and sell knickknacks to live animals, you know, without leaving the comfort of your own home. So that creates a lot of issues where it's easy for us. It makes it more convenient for us as buyers and sellers. But as crooks, it makes it a lot easier for us to circumvent all these types of ways of payment and in electronic cash methods or payment methods to be able to steal from individuals and take you know, identity thefts and things like that. I always tell people that if, you know, God forbid nothing ever happens to me, but if I ever do get robbed, you know, I would like somebody to do it, you know, like the old days, you know, it was a stick up where you had the individuals face to face, you know, they pulled a gun out on you and basically said, give me all your money. That doesn't happen very much nowadays. A lot of face-to-face transactions are obviously discouraged because of COVID right now. But this, you know, even though it was the old way of doing business, it had a little bit more respect to it as a bad guy. But the reality is, as a criminal investigator, we had a lot to go on. You know, you could describe people by their clothing, by their mannerisms, by their face, by their voice, things like that. And it gave us a running start to investigating these crimes. I just want to make sure, are y'all seeing the screen version or the presentation version?
We're
And you
seeing
can put
the
it in
screen.
slideshow presentation mode, Joey.
Say again?
On the slideshow,
Hold on. It's not letting me.
go to the left.
Hold on here.
It's okay, Joe. If you can just get it back the way it was, we'll manage. I mean, we were seeing the slides, just not in the presentation mode.
Well, let me do this real quick here. Now?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So like I said, as a criminal investigator, it gives us a lot more to go on. Nowadays, with everything going on with, you know, everything being electronic, there's really no way of knowing who's stealing from you. There's no way of knowing who's committing these thefts. You don't know whether they're male, female, and in most cases, you don't even know if they're just random robots that are actually doing this. So it creates a big barrier for us to investigate these crimes. There are several types of crimes that are out there involving money, involving, you know, with buyers and sellers. One of which is a credit card abuse. And that basically is any crime involving a credit card. If somebody gets your credit card information or the credit card numbers via an electronic method or the actual card itself. The laws in the state of Texas say that if you possess somebody's credit card or debit card without their permission, then that is with intent to use it. That is a crime in itself. You don't necessarily have to use it, but if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 of them, obviously your intent was to gain something from it. Therefore, the state of Texas says that's a crime. And they now go based on the number of credit cards and the number of identifying information, pieces of identifying information that you have to develop a certain criteria as far as whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor, what level of crime you've committed. We used to, the old agency I used to work for, we worked a case with Chili's, where some of the servers would take your card to the back and they'd rub it on a piece of paper and they got all your information basically from the card. You'll notice that now a lot of credit card information, or a lot of credit card themselves, are no longer what they call like embossed. They're now flat surfaces that you can't really do that anymore. So we work several crimes like that. Hindering secure creditor, that basically means when somebody obtains your information to obtain some type of credit. We see that a lot during the times of income tax return, because individuals that are here illegally will actually buy a person's identity, and then they'll try to secure some credit, whether it be for a vehicle, something simple as a cellular phone line, or apartment, something like that. So we start seeing those, usually those reports start coming in right around the January, February time, when people start getting their tax returns and they want, or their forms, and they start going to go do their tax returns, and they see that somebody else has already filed their taxes. I did encounter a case one time when one of the gentlemen came in to file a report, and he said, I want to file a report because somebody stole my identity. And we actually, it got back to a very huge farming location in the middle of the United States. And he said, but I don't really know if I want to file charges. And I said, well, they stole your identity. They took your stuff. Why not? And he says, well, because my credit score has actually gone up. So a lot of these individuals will make sure that they pay on time so that they don't get caught, basically. But usually it's around the tax season is when they do notice that. Online scams, we're going to go over one here in a little bit, but I mean, those are coming our way. I mean, just about each and every day. It's just, now with COVID, now with everything going on, it's just an opportunity for these individuals to do things like that. Theft by check isn't so much of a big deal right now, but it's still occurring out there. And we'll go over a little bit about how that works and things like that matter. But that basically means that you're issuing a check, whether there be no funds or very little funds, and in some cases they call it hot checks. And we'll go over a little bit about what that means. Another one that's very common right now is a theft by wire transfer. Those of y'all that are handling purchases, over $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, $20,000 purchases, you're buying or selling. A lot of it is done over wire transfer because they can go from bank to bank. And one thing we need to remember about wire transfers is that even though it's a secure form of payment, it is a final form of payment. In other words, once you submit a wire transfer, there's a very, very small window in between that transfer that you can actually stop it. And the window, depending on your banking institute, but the window is, I'm talking within minutes. And it just depends on the bank itself. But we've had a lot of incidents with wire transfers, and then what happens with wire transfers is that you'll send a wire to one bank from your bank, but then that bank, the person actually sends that to another account, and it could be an offshore account, it could be an account in another country. So we're dealing with that right now, actually, with some of our cases. I always like to put this up there because there's just so many scams out there. There really is. There's sometimes way too many. And so if you guys want to send me $20, I get to tell you the rest of the scams, right? Here's one that we're working right now. It is a large case that we're working. This case came to me about 2 years ago. And the way this case is working is that most of my victims, unfortunately, are not just in Texas, but I've got victims from almost all 50 states. Including Canada as well and other countries. What this individual did, they initially started off as HendricksRanch.com, I believe was the initial website, and now they've kind of moved over to the Round Rock Ranch. And if you've ever purchased any horses from, I believe it's Equine Now or something like that online. You'll see links to this actual ranch. So one thing that we're going to take this little dissect it step by step here is I like to look at everything as a whole. So when we look at cases and we look at crimes and we look at, people lying and things like that, we don't just take one lie and say, oh, they're lying and they're guilty. It's a culmination of lying. It's a culmination of a bunch of little things put together that tell us, the story and that lead us to a direction, not just one thing. So as you can see here, this is the actual website that belongs to Round Rock Ranch. And it's one site that we're actually monitoring right now because of thefts. But the first thing I want to point out is that when you start to talk to these individuals and you start to talk to them about the horses, they'll tell you that all the horses are located in McAllen, Texas, and that's where they're at, and that's where they have their huge farm. Well, the first thing that actually catches my attention is that if you're from South Texas, you realize that huge picture there is not South Texas. So that's one immediate thing that opens my eyes, throws that little red flag up. Okay. Another thing is that when somebody lists their address on a website, normally it's going to be a numerical address. It's not just going to be a general address saying the city, the state, and the country. In most cases, you will not see websites put the country they're in, but in this case, they're claiming that they sell and buy or they sell animals to individuals from, of course, Canada and the UK. So, again, red flag, but not at all too alarming. The next little red flag that comes up for me is, of course, the phone number. If I'm talking with these individuals and I'm kind of giving you a background on the case, individuals will send an email saying, hey, I'm interested in this horse. And then somebody, which they're right now representing themselves as David Hendricks, will send you a real nice email back describing the horse. And you would never believe that these individuals knew nothing about horses. I mean, they know everything about horses. They give you some really good detail on the horse. And they're going to contact you either by phone or by email, and they'll text you and things like that. So it seems legit. The red flag for me is the fact that the phone number on there, the area code is not in relation to the area in which they're supposedly selling the animals. That area code, I think, might be in the northern Texas area, if it is in this area, but it does not go to this area. So that's another red flag. Another thing that I always tend to look at, especially when I'm looking at internet scams, and this is a big red flag for me, is that when you talk to these individuals from the Round Rock Ranch, they're going to tell you everything about your horse. They're going to sell you the horse, and they're going to tell you the most amazing things about the horse, and they're going to tell you how much the cost is to transport. And like I said, you're buying a horse from the comfort of your own home. They've actually scammed a lot of people in the Canadian area. I've had about 7 victims in that area that they're still waiting for their horses to get transported over there. So the biggest red flag that's on this website itself is, of course, the copyright date. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically when you establish your website online with some type of company, like maybe GoDaddy, or maybe you're running your own server, right? It just depends. But it worries me that the copyright date on here is 2020. We're 9 months in, 10, actually we're on our 11th month in, or I'm sorry, our 10th month. Yeah, we're already November. Sorry about that. So we're on our 11th month in to the year. And if you're well established and you've been selling to all these individuals and you've been around for a long, long time, why is it that your website is copyrighted in 2020? So that's a big red flag for me. And of course, all the flags, all these things on here are big red flags. This scam in particular is still being investigated. We're talking about, I probably get about 10 calls a week, and out of those 10, 7 have paid for horses and never gotten them. Individually, I think the average is about $7,000, $3,000 to $7,000. So we're looking at about $40,000, give or take, a week that these individuals are making on this scam alone. And we are currently working with the federal government to see if we can get these things shut down, but it's very hard to shut down a website. If you go into the website and you start looking at individual animals, individual horses, you're going to see that, all the different pictures. Again, a red flag for me is the fact that if all these animals are in McAllen, Texas, if they were born and raised here, or whatever it is, why are those pictures so different? You know, and again, if you're from South Texas, you could probably pick out a few of those pictures that are not from here. Another red flag for me too is that all of these horses are the same age. You don't see that very often when you go to equine sites and that. I mean, they're just going to be. It's like going to Craigslist and finding the same, 2010 pickup truck all the way across. I mean, it doesn't happen. The other thing that worries me here too is that if you notice on the price range, they're all $4,500. Again, I can guarantee you that those horses are valued differently, and at $4,500, that bothers me. Obviously, I know that this is a fictitious website because we're currently investigating it. Things that you should look at whenever you're conducting some type of a sale or a purchase or a sale online. A lot of people, when they purchase livestock animals, they'll actually go obviously out of the area or sometimes even out of the state, whether it be you're looking for pigs or steers or heifers or whatever you're looking to purchase. And a lot of those purchases are for the most part are being done in person because you want to pick out what animal you want, and you want something specific to your needs for whatever show or whatever you're going to, whatever show you're actually going to go to, depending on age and weight and stuff. And a lot of those are being done by checks. And I'll tell you right now is that the form of check is probably one of the best crimes or one of the best things to investigate because unlike an electronic transfer or what we're going to talk about a little bit, your electronic money, your virtual money apps, a check can actually be traced back to the original person. And there's a bunch of ways, but one of them in particular is fingerprints. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you is that gathering fingerprints on things such as paper and other items is not like, NCIS or CSI shows where they literally find a fingerprint on everything in the room. I've seen where individuals are kidnapped and things like that, and they're touching everything, and suspects are all over the place. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do is get a fingerprint. It's got to be really, really perfect. The thing about a check is that when you grab a check and you hold a check, there's a good chance that one of your fingers is going to actually press on it. And these checks, the paper that's made with these checks and the way they're made with the security features, they actually retain the oils of your skin very well. So it's a good start to fingerprinting and finding out who issued these checks. A couple of things you need to look at whenever you're accepting checks is obviously the name on the check. Make sure that it's the individual that is actually making the purchase. If it's not, I'd question as to why isn't that person here, or why are you making a check from another person? It could be wife's name or a different account, but I want to know why. We worked a case recently where some animals were a local FFA project, and the individual issued a check under his children's name. Well, the thing is the children were over 18. They didn't even know they had a bank account open, and dad was actually conducting theft via their name and via their information. So make sure you look at that. Make sure that the addresses coincide. Don't feel free to ask for a driver license. If somebody's giving you a check, that's why when you go use a check somewhere, ask somebody, ask you for your driver license to make sure they know, who's issuing that check, and they know who can be traced back to. So that's not an issue at all, unless of course somebody The other thing I'd worry about is post-dated checks. And my number one rule is if they cannot pay you now, they will not pay you later. In some of these FFA projects that we've dealt with as well, some of the victims said, well, he told me he'd have the money by, next month or in 2 weeks. So the issue with that is that, they didn't have it then. There's probably a reason that they didn't have it, and there's probably going to be a reason why they didn't have it, why they're not going to have it next month or next week. So be careful with post-dated checks. Excuse me. Filling out of checks. I'm a very big believer that I am not going to sign anything unless it's completely filled out. I want it in my ink and I want it in my writing. I will hardly ever sign anything that I will tell you, you know what, you can fill it out later. Be wary of that, because I want to know, there are some incidents where maybe the purchase was made via phone and they hired a contract hauler to go and pick up the animal or pick up the hay bales or whatever it is that you're selling. But I want to make sure that we're aware that, you know, what's being filled in and what's not. You know, here's a common one. We had that with some hay bale frauds, where individuals were issuing a check for, you know, the cost of the bales is $2,500, and they said, well, you know, you made the check out for $3,000, and of course the suspect would say, oh, it's, you know, whatever, you know, a little bit for yourself, you know, for the transport. You know, I'm gonna tell you right now, I mean, you can call me Pinche or whatever you want, but I'll tell you right now, if you're gonna charge me $2,500, you ain't getting more than $2,500. You know, so be weary of that. You know, it's not very common for somebody to give you an extra amount of money for your troubles. And a lot of times we deal with those because once you cash the check, later on you find out that it was a fraud, it's a fake check. Now you owe all that money back to the bank because you cashed it. So, and do not be afraid of calling the institute of the bank, of the issuing bank. Okay, most of these checks, when they're written, they're not going to say that it's for theft, that they're going to scam you out of this money. So make sure that you get with the institute. For instance, if it's IBC Bank, you call IBC Bank. They may not tell you anything other than, yes, there's sufficient funds for that check. If for some reason you run into a teller or somebody that doesn't want to give you that information, you can always call, speak with a supervisor manager. For the most part, I've never heard of anybody having issues with that. Or you can go to your own bank, tell them, hey, look, I got this check. I don't want to cash it yet, but what I want you to do is, can you check just to verify the funds are good? You never want to cash a check immediately like that, because if you start pulling funds out of that check and the check gets returned, you're obviously responsible for the money that was deducted. I get these calls a lot about hot checks, bounce checks. It's basically the same thing, okay? The issue with this is how the local district attorney's office will decipher the case, or how they will take the case depending on the situation. In the case of checks being made for agriculture, any type of agriculture product or anything like that, for the most part, they're going to take it as a hot check because it is a misdemeanor depending on the amount of the check. However, if the check is made for any type of livestock, it's automatic felony. And in most cases, district attorney's office that we work with, they're really good about taking that case take it as a felony case. What does that mean for you and me? Well, felony cases are a lot more intriguing because you can do a lot more with a felony case. And in most cases, individuals that are charged with felonies, they get a little bit more time, whether it be probation or whether it be incarceration. Misdemeanor offenses are like getting a ticket or a DWI, things like that, where sometimes you can just pay a fine and you're done. Most felony offense cases do go to court because people want to fight it. But the difference is how the district attorney's office will accept the case. And like I said, most of them right now, they're pretty good about taking them as theft cases. A hot check or bounce check usually goes through a hot check division, and that becomes a civil issue. They send demand letters. And eventually it can result in a warrant, but for me, it's a little bit too much in time. So I want to get somebody going, and I want somebody to answer for what they've, the check they've written or the amount they've written, so we can get things going. Virtual money. I'll go over this real quickly. Most of y'all, if you haven't, it's just the wave of the future. We don't carry cash anymore. It went from always carrying cash or checks, and now you just got a debit card. Then what happened was you go with your buddies or your coworkers, you go to eat, and for instance, let's just say you took the day off or had something going on, you want to go eat at King's Inn. Well, if you've ever been to King's Inn, you know that they only take one form of payment and it's only one check. So you always had that one guy say, I'll take care of it, get me later. Well, now that's a thing of the past. With apps like Cash App and Zelle, you can literally tell everybody, okay, you owe me $20, and you can literally pay them right there at the table. So it makes things a little bit more easy for us when making sorts of payments. I know my friends are, even my kids and everybody, they're selling raffle tickets and, save me 3 tickets and I'll get you later. No, now it's like, hey, here's my Cash App, sign, and just send me the money over Cash App. All right. So it does make things easier, but that makes it easier for those crooks to actually infiltrate your phone or the app itself in order to take your information or money from your banking account. Out of all the ones that you see up here, probably one of the most secure ones besides Apple Pay is going to be PayPal. And if you're conducting business, whether it be in any type form of the agriculture business, whether you're selling produce, whether you're selling hay, livestock, anything, whether you're buying or selling, PayPal has a very, very good business version of the app. You can invoice individuals, and you can even cancel payment. You can return somebody's money. It's a really good app, and I'm a big believer with PayPal so far because I've heard very little horror stories on it. Rest of them, Facebook, Cash App, I've heard a lot of stuff. Keep in mind that when you're using apps like Apple Pay and Cash App and Facebook, you're doing a person-to-person transaction, and person-to-person transactions normally cannot be canceled. When you're doing something on the business wise, you can cancel, return, things like that. But a person-to-person deal cannot be canceled. I see that a lot when individuals, say, well, I want to buy, I'm selling a cow online, whether it be on Facebook Marketplace or whether it be on Craigslist. You're selling something online and they send it to you via Cash App. Well, once you send them the money, there's no returning it. That's just the way the system works. Obviously, prevention is a key. And in law enforcement, we love working cases. The special rangers that are stationed across Texas, we love working cases. We love getting involved with everything that we can. But as any law enforcement officer within the state, our biggest thing is to prevent things from happening. We want to make sure that we can prevent a crime from happening, and not necessarily because we don't want to work it, but we know that we're doing our job if we can prevent things. The less crime there is, the better off we all are. Obviously, websites, you want to make sure that they're reputable, look at copyrights. You want to keep an eye out for certain area codes, phone numbers associated with the website so that you know that it is legitimate. Checks, of course, make sure that the person issuing the check is the person's name that's on there. Always look at the signature. Sometimes we have individuals that have a signature, like doctors, but try to make it out. If you see a driver's license to confirm it, you can see the different signatures. Call the bank. I always tell everybody, call a bank. See if there's enough funds, and try to stay away from post-dated checks. One thing I will tell everybody, because I get a lot of calls on this almost weekly, is this: if an individual writes you a check and they don't make payment, and that individual then later says, well, can I send you half? Can I send you $30 or $1,000? And you accept that as payment, and you figure, okay, they'll pay me. First of all, they didn't pay you to begin with, so now they want a payment plan. Okay, you're the seller, you make your own rules. But the thing is that once you accept forms of payment, that's out of our hands. We only handle criminal matters. So anything after that, once you accept your forms of payment, will be civil matters. That means you have to go to a justice of the peace for a small claims court or county court, depending on the how much money was involved. Be careful with virtual payments. Virtual payments are really, really easy, really, really great to work with, but it just creates, it just opens a door to individuals that are looking to hack, looking to take your information and exploit it, selling it, different forms of online, the websites and things like that. If you're going to use online payments, if you're going to use links, or if you're going to use electronic forms of payment, I would set a business platform up with either PayPal or QuickBooks. Those are pretty good platforms. They do have a guarantee. They do have ways to secure payment and things like that. And I would go that route. You may end up having to pay for the service a little bit, but trust me, when you're making sales or purchases, over a certain amount of money, it's a great insurance to have a good operating system to do that. I'm going to put my information you see up there. My cell phone number's up there. It's the best way to reach me. I answer calls throughout the day, throughout the week. I would rather people call me and ask me before conducting certain businesses or sales or purchases, so that I can, if they think something's wrong, if they think something's up, if they don't feel right, I can tell you that more than likely something is wrong. But I'd rather get a call to try to prevent that, then get a call later and say, look, I sent them $30,000. I don't even know where it went now, and they don't answer me. We don't know. We didn't even get, what we're supposed to get and things like that. So I'd rather get the calls first than have to, work the cases later and hope that we can get some type of money back or your items back. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Joe. Are there any questions for Joe? Nothing in that box. Okay, I guess while we're waiting on some questions, Joe, we'll go ahead and give the last 2 door prizes away. So, if you don't mind.
Aaron Peña.
Okay, Aaron Peña, if you could text me your mailing address at 956-500-4073, we'll get that to you. And one more.
Okay, last one. Raúl Aguilar.
Raúl Aguilar. Again, if you could text me your mailing information to 956-500-4073. We'll get those gift cards to you. Joe, thank you for that information. I don't see any more questions unless somebody has some right now that they want to ask.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Joe. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Vidal. He's going to go ahead and wrap up the program. Thanks again for your participation.
To all the participants, before y'all leave the meeting, if y'all could do us a little favor and on your chat box at the very bottom, there's a link for what we call a Qualtrics survey, just to see if y'all's knowledge before the program and after the program. And also if y'all could give us, if y'all have anything you want addressed as far as topics in the future, so we could consider for the next program, we'd really appreciate that. And I really want to thank all the speakers and all the participants for attending the program. And hopefully, if y'all give us some more pointers and direction, we can have another quality program in the near future. But if y'all could do us that favor, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.